We all want to be happy, but how does one be happy when everything seems to go wrong in your life? Joseph Goewey tells us how we can be happy with increased consciousness, even when life seems to go wrong. Welcome to the Excellent Executive Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Katrina Burrus, and today we're going to interview Joseph Goewey. Welcome,
Yes.
Don. Welcome.
Thank you.
So you've written a book called Stop Fixing Yourself. Tell us a little bit about your book and what's the key message that you're trying to convey.
The book contains the spiritual philosophy of Anthony De Mello. I had access to the archive of his written material, and I put this book together. And a key theme of Anthony De Mello's philosophy is to stop fixing yourself. You're not broken. There's nothing wrong with you. And De Mello was noted in the 20th century for integrating Eastern and Western spirituality. And, he influenced some of the great spiritual thinkers like Eckhart Tolle, Ajahn Thomas More. And he died in 1987, but his books have continued to be bestsellers worldwide. I think he sold something like 2 million already. And what De Mello is about rediscovering life, rediscovering the happiness that's innate in every human being. And the problem is it's really hard to find a completely happy person, and underline that word completely. If you look at the research, it's only about 4% of the population. That means out of 100 people, 96% don't really know how to be happy. And the irony is we were born happy. We were born free, but we've become trapped in our own limited thinking. We've been programmed into thinking in limited ways. We were born with an open heart that stress and fear so easily close. We were born gifted, beings of immeasurable worth, but we often feel that we're not good enough. And what De Mello is telling us is that there's a divinity of joy within us, residing within us. It's part of our spiritual DNA. And a divinity of joy surrounding us, there to make our lives meaningful and beautiful and rich and successful, but we become blocked from seeing it. It's almost as if we're all hypnotized to see what's not there and not see what is there. And that's the result of the way we've been programmed. We've been socialized. Society programmed all of that wonderful things I just mentioned right out of us, stamping into us the belief that happiness and self-worth are found out there in the world. And, if we work long and hard, success is going to come. And out of that, happiness and fulfillment will follow. And anybody that's worked in psychology, worked in coaching, know that around midlife, people come to us because they swallowed that formula. And what they found is that success has come to whatever degree that it's come, but without fulfillment. And that's failing at life. That's what De Mello is telling us. So waking up is the realization that contrary to what society has taught us, nothing, but absolutely nothing of the world can make us happy. It's not that success is unimportant. Of course, it's vitally important, but success is not the same as fulfillment. And we make that confusion. Fulfillment doesn't come from the world. Happiness doesn't come from the world, not the radiant happiness of a child.
So define for us a little the difference. So it's very explicit, the difference between fulfillment and success and a sense of contentment with our lives. And deprogramming, because you said you were programmed to feel the stress and what should give you happiness. And so how do you unprogram yourself?
Yeah, you're right. That's exactly what I'm saying. We've been programmed by society to upset ourselves. How does that happen? It's when life doesn't go the way our programming demands it should, in terms of how the world should be, who we should be, what we should want. And you free yourself from that oppressive fear of failing through awareness. You step back from the distress, and at the same time, you allow yourself to be in the upset without trying to fix it, without doing anything with it. Stop fixing it. Understanding the stress is happening in you. It's not happening to you. It's not happening in reality, but equally, and that you're not that upset. You're upset is a way in which you were programmed that wired your brain to set off the stress response system that has you reacting as if there's some kind of threat out there. And, most of the time what we find is that there's no threat at all. It's imagined. We've
Okay, so
imagined it.
I'm going to interrupt you, Don, and say, okay,
Sure.
someone is having terrible financial problems. They can't pay their car payments. COVID's hit their business, etc. So tell us how they can find a certain fulfillment and happiness, I would say, from a situation like that. What can get them to a sense of peace?
By becoming increasingly aware of the upset that they're having. The premise that they're starting with, if they're really wanting to move beyond how frightened they are, how ashamed they are, whatever is the emotional reaction that they're having to their circumstances, as they move beyond it, they have to accept the premise that they can be in debt. They can be in a world where COVID's a reality, and at the same time, be happy, be at peace with themselves, be fully alive. But most people don't believe that. They think their circumstances need to change. Viktor Frankl, who spent the entire war, World War II, in Auschwitz and came out, wrote a wonderful book. And he said, when you find yourself in circumstances you can't change, then the challenge is to change yourself. And so how do you get to that place where you can be in the middle of the mess that you're feeling, the middle of your neurosis, the middle of your problems, your work problems, your life problems? How can you be in the middle of that and not lose touch with that happiness and that peace that resides within you? And the answer is you got to get deprogrammed. And awareness is the way you get deprogrammed. What you're aware of, you begin to control. What you're unaware of will continue to control you. So it's enough for you to simply be watchful and aware. And through that, all that's neurotic, all that's upsetting within you will drop. And you have to step into it to experience this. And so the first step you need to do is to get in touch with those upsetting feelings you're having, those anxious, negative, frustrating, pessimistic feelings, frustration that you're usually not aware of, that are just running automatically in you. What negative feelings? Hurt feelings, feeling nervous and tense, feeling ashamed of yourself, feeling gloomy, feeling life is pointless, all of that. Observe the thoughts you're thinking that produce the upset that you're feeling and the beliefs behind those thoughts. I'm supposed to be a success. I'm supposed to be debt-free. I'm not supposed to be neurotic. All of those things that are become pressure points within you. Observe the thoughts and the feelings they turn into, and then step back from it as if you're watching someone else suffering in this same way. I always advise people to imagine it's their best friend suffering in this way, because there's less of a chance you're going to judge that person. You're going to be more compassionate about it. And at the same time, while you're stepping back and observing this upset that's going on inside of you, allow yourself to feel it. Feel how awful it feels. And as you do that, the second step is simply to acknowledge that this negative feeling, this upset's not in reality, it's in you. The reality is what it is. Reality is neutral, basically. We, through our attitude, through our mindset, we impose what we think that reality means. And out of that, we generate it. We generate whatever we generate in the way of our experience. But the reality is neutral. And that's such a self-evident thing for ordinary people living an ordinary life. But often people don't get it. So tell yourself it's happening in you, not to you. And you will begin to understand that that's true. And the third step is not to identify with that negative feeling. Don't even say, I am depressed, or I am afraid, or I am ashamed. Your brain has a way of taking things that you say to yourself literally and evoking the experience that gives rise to. So it's fine to say, fear is there right now. Shame is there right now. My upset is there right now. But don't define yourself in terms of that feeling. That's your illusion. That's your mistake. You are not a feeling any more than if you threw black paint up into the air. Do you contaminate the air? The paint comes down, splashes on the ground, the air stays blue. In the same way, when these feelings pass, you're the blue sky of your being. So the other step is to, as you go through this process of awareness, what you will find is those feelings will pass. You may not even notice it at first. Everything passes in life, especially your emotions. What your intense emotion was 5 days ago, you can't even remember. It's past. So another step in the process is that as you come into bringing these upsets into awareness, not trying to fix anything, telling yourself this is happening in me, not to me, it's not happening in reality. It's my perception of what's going on. And you just stay with it, it'll pass. And as it passes, what will happen is that a space will open up. You might even feel a kind of a tingling in your heart. That's your heart that's opening, that you've closed. And as that happens, just relax into it. Let your mind be quiet for a moment. And in that quiet, in that spaciousness, what you will notice is that the space expands. And what naturally begins to arise in you is this feeling of happiness, this feeling of peace, this feeling of connection, and also this feeling of freedom from the upset that happened. And as you do this over a course of 2 weeks, you'll begin to understand. If you look at the beliefs behind the thoughts that are leading to your upsetting emotions, you'll see that those beliefs were programmed into you by society. That you're supposed to be this way, that you're supposed to achieve this thing, that your life needs to be measured in this way. And in this expansive state, what you discover is none of that's really relevant. You're in charge of your experience no matter what's going on outside.
So tell us how this sort of state, what relationship there is between neuroscience and happiness. Are you reprogramming your brain in a different way?
Yes, you're definitely reprogramming your brain in a different way. You know, one of the things that we've discovered in neuroscience over the last 25 years is that this way in which that we have been programmed to be upset when life doesn't fit the picture that society has planted in our brains, that those upsets trigger a part of our brain called the amygdala. It's in the limbic system, the emotional brain. And that part of the brain is highly reactive. It's got the intelligence of a 2-year-old. You know, it just throws us into tantrums to one degree or another. It sets off the stress response system, meaning fight, flight, or freeze. And what we've seen through brain scans is that someone who's trapped in that chronically, which is nearly half the population, who are chronically having those kinds of stress reactions set off by the negative way they're thinking and believing and the upsets that's causing. It's triggering that emotional brain. And what that causes is a flood of hormones to be released into your body, into your system. And those hormones literally shrink the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is where your intelligence, your emotional intelligence, your fluid intelligence, your creative intelligence, everything that makes you successful in life, everything that makes you happy in life. It shrinks those neural networks. And at the same time, those hormones, those stress hormones, expand that reactive part of your brain, the fear center of the brain. And so you get locked in, you get fear conditioned. And on top of that, what those stress hormones do is that they also damage your DNA so that your DNA starts putting out abnormal cells that lead to cancer, that lead to premature aging. That's why somebody who's chronically stressed looks so much older than their actual age. So that's what's going on in there. But what we know is that when a person makes a shift out of anxiety and fear and stress into being more at peace, into being happier, into letting go of the misperception that there's some kind of threat out there, and using awareness to shift their experience in the way I was just talking about, the reverse happens in your brain, that higher order brain function in the prefrontal cortex actually begins to expand, and the fear center, the part that makes your life so unhappy and so stressful, actually shrink, and your DNA repairs itself. And so there's a huge benefit to stepping into awareness, not only in terms of your physical and emotional well-being, but in terms of your capacity to succeed at life. And the trick that rewires your brain is this process of awareness. Awareness releases you from those habitual knee-jerk reactions that you're having to get to choice. And then that choice will be for this experience that's now arising in you naturally. And that impasse, when the upsetting feelings pass and you're in that expanded moment and you have that experience of happiness and contentment arising with you and a greater feeling of connection with all that is arising within you. Anyone in their right mind will say, that's the experience I want to have. And now you're a choice to have that.
Okay, so let's go in a very concrete, practical example. You have someone coming to you that is stressed, that is unhappy, that they feel that they've failed in life. And can you go through the process again of how you help them take a distance from the situation? Like you say, you're aware of the feelings, you step back from it, you look at it as if somebody else is going through that experience like your best friend. And then you sort of feel what that emotion is. You acknowledge that it's not a reality. It's what is happening to you or not in you. So you sort of take a sort of a research outlook on what's going on within you of some way.
Well, I can give you an example from my own life.
Yes, please.
It's how I got into this field of psychospirituality. Years ago, I experienced what I call my perfect storm of stress. I lost an executive level position that I had at Stanford University Medical School, that I devoted more than a decade climbing the career ladder to reach. And 9 days after losing the job, I was diagnosed with a brain tumor. The doctors warned would leave me seriously disabled, maybe potentially unable to ever work again. And, I was married with 4 young children at the time. And my marriage also was in trouble, because I devoted so much energy to my career, so much attention to that at the expense of my family. So suddenly, my life is coming apart at the seams, and it seems there's nothing I can do to shift the impending catastrophe. And I had about 6 weeks before the surgery was to take place. And the first 2 weeks were emotionally painful, to say the least. Every night I'd wake up 3 o'clock in the morning, stare out the window into the cold, dark night, terrified. And one night I reached this point where I questioned which was actually worse, the dire problems that the doctors predicted that might happen, might not happen in the future, or the abject fear that was happening in me every day, all day long. And the answer was clear. The fear was worse. The bone-chilling fear that I was under was consuming me. And I knew it was depleting the strength I needed to get through everything I was going to have to get through. So for the next half hour, I used this process that I just talked to you about, this awareness process. It had been taught to me by a famous psychologist who had actually worked with Anthony De Mello, Carl Rogers. And so I practiced it. I allowed all of the upsetting feelings, all the anxiety, all the frustration, all the worry to arise in me. It was overwhelming. But I was able to ride it. I just stayed with it. It reached a point, it was almost like, you're out in the ocean and you're riding a big wave and you're at a point of no return. You're praying you reach shore. And I did. And I got to that point where I could see past it, past the fear. Everything just kind of mysteriously quieted down in me. Awareness did that for me. And then I relaxed. I was relieved to be out of all of that emotional pain. And then it arose again. So I wrote it again. And I did that repeatedly for this next half hour. And it began to become clear for me that these upsets were really in me, superimposed on my circumstances. And it reached a point where, as I said, I could see this is happening in me. I watched it pass. And then as it passed, this feeling of relief rose from within me all by itself, this feeling of contentment, of being safe. And it turned into this feeling of inner peace, this feeling of safety. And I knew I'd crossed over because, when I'd look out the window into the cold, dark night, I didn't see the cold, dark night this time. I saw what was actually there, which was the moonlight shimmering on this beautiful oak tree in front of my house. And so I made up my mind right then and there as I approached the surgery and I approached getting another job that I was going to let go of fear and anxiety and upsets in this way, in using awareness in this way. And I submitted to surgery, and the surgery was a complete success. And if neuroscientists knew back then what they know now, they didn't know it back then. And if I had asked them back then, do you think that my shift in mindset here, the shift that I went through awareness, had an effect on the surgery and the surgical outcome, that beneficial outcome I had? They would have said no. They said just hippie nonsense. But today we know it does. It's called the mind-body effect. And neuroscience would tell you now that that shift in attitude, that shift in perspective and outlet that I gained through using that awareness process had the mind-body effect that benefited me in that surgery. And, I actually even got my job back at Stanford University Medical Center because the chairman at the Department of Psychiatry had heard about this guy who life had put in a checkmate, doomed. And yet he was optimistic. People marveled at my attitude. And so the chairman of the Department of Psychiatry said, when I came through the surgery, he said, I want to give you a job. I want you to make you my executive because we need an attitude like that in this godforsaken department. So I got my job back. And
what a wonderful story.
True story. And if I hadn't done that, if I hadn't stepped into awareness, and I was grabbing at straws at that moment, the irony is that process that I had learned from Carl Rogers, that awareness process, I had actually been teaching to other people, coaching other people to do, and I'd never done it on myself. And by some grace, it came in sideways, and I thought I'll practice this. But I was really grabbing at straws. But the one thing is when you stumble across something that works, you're motivated to continue to do it because it's giving you the result that you want. And the result that I wanted was to be free of all the upset I was causing myself. And the upset I was causing myself really had to do with the way that I was programmed. I was convinced, society's programming had convinced me by getting a brain tumor, I completely failed myself and my family. And that's a huge burden, and it's going to weigh you down, and you can free yourself of that. That's mind-made, but you have to go into it. And you've got to go into the mind that made it up, the brain that turned it into a habitual way of reacting. But as you do, it loosens the wiring.
Right. And even with the neuroscience, you have a new wiring that takes place that happens over the old wiring. You have new neural connections.
New neural connections. And it may be that some of those past traumas that you've experienced before will come up, but because your brain's rewired, you shift out of them quickly. I think neurologically, if you were to define enlightenment in neurological terms, it means that an upset comes up and you're able to shift your experience at the point of inception of that upset. And the more you practice awareness, this simple process of awareness that you'll find in this book, the quicker you'll make the shift. I haven't seen anybody that I've coached not experience some feeling of adequacy in using this process and moving them to the experience they want to have in as short a period of time as 2 weeks. And, De Mello and none of the mystics, and frankly, none of the psychologists are talking about that you renounce the material world. I often ask people to sit down and make a list of their attachments, and because attachments are what cause most of our suffering, and that's most of where our programming relies, in things we become attached to. Being attached to being a success, attached to having the right person, attached to our kids going to the right schools. Not that those are bad things, but the problem is that a detachment means that you've defined something out there in the world that without which you cannot be happy. And the truth of the matter is there is not a moment in your life when you don't have everything you need to be happy right here, right now. The only reason you're unhappy and not at peace and suffering is because you're focusing on what you don't have rather than what you have right here and right now. So I invite people to make this list right at the top. I cannot be happy until, or unless, and start writing down what comes to mind. And people oftentimes write down, until I'm out of debt, until my spouse agrees I'm right and they're wrong, until my boss appreciates me, until I get that raise, until I get that promotion. People make a very long list. And then I said, go back over and read that list. That's why you're suffering. You have made all of those things. You made your happiness dependent on all of those things. Your happiness isn't dependent on anything to do with the outside world. It's dependent on your ability to move through your upset, to go beyond it, to transcend them, and to allow that happiness that's innately in you to arise all by itself. Science has come to the conclusion we're innately happy. It's in our nature to be happy. Because what they look to when they try to understand human nature is to children. And so I always invite people, when you're out in the world, watch children, small children, before they've been contaminated by the school system, the religious system, by their own parents. Watch the children in their natural state, and you'll see how happy and what a state of wonder that they're in, with just ordinary things, with just life exactly as it is. That's what we're moving towards. And, as I said, it's not about, you make your list of what you're attached to, but it's not about renouncing those things. It's not about like wanting better schools for your kids is wrong, or wanting to move up the ladder in your company is wrong. One uses the material world. One enjoys the material world, but one does not make one's happiness depend on the material world. And the irony is, when you're detached from the material world as you pursue success, you actually enjoy the process more. Then when you believe your self-worth and your peace and your happiness depend on the outcome. If you succeed, great. If you fail, your happiness and self-worth are not at stake.
Right. I think that's a super important message. And what an inspiring message you just gave. Unfortunately, we're coming to the end of our podcast, and I would like to know where people can get a hold of you and purchase your book.
They can purchase this book at Amazon. It's been out now for nearly a year, so the price has come down. So now's a good time to buy it, too. It's a wonderful book. And I also have a book out called The End of Stress that goes into all the neuroscience that we're talking about, the shift from stress to peace and how that happens neurologically through the process of neuroplasticity. And you can find more about Anthony DeMello at DeMelloCenter.com, and DeMello spelled DeMello. A lot of good stuff there, a lot of videos and audios and blog posts and things like that.
Thank you very, very much, Don. Most interesting and also very uplifting message.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And thank you for what you're doing in the world.
Thank you, sweetheart. Great. We would love to know what you thought of this podcast. Write us an email at drkatrina with a K at excellentexecutivecoaching.com. We would love to hear what you liked and what we could improve. This podcast has been sponsored by excellentexecutivecoaching.com.
Thank you for listening to the Excellent Executive Coaching Podcast. You can subscribe to all future podcasts at excellentexecutivecoaching.com. Join us each Wednesday to learn more about the latest trends in leadership techniques and bring your coaching to the next level. To learn more about Dr. Burris's CEO Mastermind, use the contact form at excellentexecutivecoaching.com.